What was your favorite YA series? I mean, everyone's got at least one. The series that hooked them for at least a solid year or two. And honestly, it makes sense. There are some great ones out there. And in the early 2000s alone, we were positively spoiled with heavy hitters like Hunger Games, Twilight, and of course the big daddy of them all, Harry Potter. But in the nooks and crannies away from the billion-dollar movie deals, there were some truly great series that got criminally overlooked for one reason or another. And one of the best examples of this is a series full of surprisingly faithful historical detail, shocking dark moments for YA. We're talking straight up slavery and forced drug addiction, as well as a whole lot of dry banter and coffee. Now I'm talking, of course, about Ranger's Apprentice, a low-key fantasy adventure about a short kid, his equally short mentor, the power of stealth, friendship, and, throwing knives at people. But here's the thing, this series didn't just come and go, and in fact there have been a ton of books over the years, and the entire thing can be surprisingly confusing with 12 mainline books, prequels, sequels, spin-offs, and a movie adaptation that's been in limbo longer than some fans have been alive. So in this video, we're diving deep into it, what it's all about, how it quietly became one of the longest running YA series out there, the chaotic history of its still unreleased film, and finally, where everything is at today to explore whatever happened to Ranger's Apprentice. Hi everyone, my name is Otto, and welcome to Exits Examined. In this channel, we will be exploring series, franchises, and more after their prime time has seemingly come to an end. If that sounds good to you, there's a like and subscribe button below, and I want to give an enormous shout out to my patrons who make this channel possible. Thank you. Now, quick heads up, I tried to keep this mostly spoiler free, but fair warning, there will be minor spoilers throughout. Alright, so Ranger's Apprentice. There is a lot going on in here. We're talking prequels, sequels, spin-offs, and a whole expanded universe situation, and trying to explain it all can feel like a bit much, but at the heart of it, the actual premise is surprisingly straightforward. The series kicked off in 2004 with John Flanagan's Ranger's Apprentice, a long-running and wildly successful fantasy series. And it's of course about the Rangers, who are elite scouts who serve the kingdom of Araluen. They're part spy, part special forces, part medieval CIA, with a dash of Jedi and Strider thrown in. They operate in the shadows, gather intelligence, guide armies, and quietly save kingdoms. Also, they are really into coffee, like alarmingly so. So much so that there are actually official recipes from the publishers online, which I'll link below for those who are curious. Now, crucially, the Rangers are not magical. Don't expect fireballs or anything, but their skills do look supernatural to the average medieval peasant. Cloaks that make them vanish into the woods? No, they're just really good at camouflage. Inhuman accuracy with a longbow? Well, that's what happens when you train obsessively from the age of 15. Now, you might be thinking, counterintelligence, battles, and longbows, that sounds suspiciously brutal for a YA series, and you would be 100% right. There's this kind of fascinating duality at play, because while Ranger's Apprentice was definitely aimed at younger readers, it dives headfirst into some shockingly dark territory. We're talking about slavery, extended and brutal descriptions of medieval warfare, and even, of course, the straight-up aforementioned drug addiction. And even from book one, things get intense pretty fast. Now, the basic premise might sound familiar at first, kind of classic YA fare. We got a young orphan named Will who's scrappy and clever with a habit of sneaking around and is looking for his place in the world, but instead of getting tossed into juvie, he gets recruited into the mysterious and elite Ranger Corps. And Will quickly learns that the Rangers are kind of like a fusion of the US Army Rangers and Cold War era spies, and it's all a refreshingly grounded take for a fantasy series, and it works because the Rangers have a real strategic function in the world. They're masters of reconnaissance, sabotage, and asymmetrical warfare. And we watch Will learn not just the how of the Rangers, but the why these skills matter, and how they fit into a world that can be downright unforgiving, hostile, and dangerous both at the individual level and even at the geopolitical level. So speaking of that, this is a great time to zoom out and look at what kind of worlds we're actually dealing with here. Well, it's basically medieval Europe. I mean, not officially, but come on. Araluen, where most of the series is set, is very clearly England, complete with Viking-style raiders called Scandians, rival kingdoms, and lots of war. And as you can probably tell, this world isn't some cozy, fairy tale-ified version of the Middle Ages. It doesn't pull punches and is realistic in that way. There's near constant warfare, multiple civil wars, and I can't overstate enough how much this adds to the series. And what's better is that Flanagan doesn't just sketch out a map and call it a day. Foreign lands and powers are mentioned very naturally within each book. And what makes this so fun is how every region has its own identity, its own culture, military style, and even language quirks, almost always with a corresponding real-world parallel. For example, Scandia are axe-swinging raiders all about honor, ships, and drinking, who are basically Vikings, though I'm sure Flanagan would diplomatically disagree. Then we got Galicia, the feudal-esque home to knights who can be both honorable and annoying at times, aka France. Then we got Nihonja, complete with swordmasters and a focus on honor and discipline, so Japan. And finally, Celtica, who, well, you guessed it, they're Celts. And I'm not trying to sound reductive by saying the countries are just lazy interpretations of medieval countries. In fact, it's a great thing, especially for a YA, and you see similar strategies in a bunch of fantasy worlds, even all the way back to Conan the Barbarian. After all, you don't need pages of exposition to know what fantasy France is all about, and this is especially good if this is your first fantasy series, and crucially, it's not lazy. There are a ton of details that are lovingly put in here. You get entire glossaries on Scandian sailing techniques, info on how they design their ships, their gods, even how the Nihonja harden their steel, and there's a deep respect here for cultural nuance, and it shows. And this all ties into one of the most impressive elements of the world, which is how grounded it feels in actual medieval life. Flanagan clearly loves history and it shows. You get realistic descriptions of what an actual medieval boar hunt would look like and down-to-earth day-to-day stuff like the sailing, but more than anything, the series really excels at the battles, which, oh my god, the battles. Now, you know how a lot of YA fantasy, the epic battle is kind of a quick blur or only really focuses on the main character's POV and skips the wider strategy. Well, not here. These battles are long, like chapters and chapters worth of gritty and shockingly realistic detail. We're talking about in-depth descriptions of cavalry charges, feints by this world Mongols, which by the way the Mongols actually did in the real world, and brutal post-battle scenes where our young protagonists come face to face with what battle actually means, aka a lot of dead people. And you feel the weight of strategy and logistics, flanking maneuvers, terrain advantages, morale, supply lines, and this commitment to realism and historical portrayal is great if you're a blossoming history nerd, and another hugely defining aspect to the series. Now, I don't want to say that everything is 100% grounded, because you might be thinking, okay, well, this is a YA fantasy series, so where's the magic? So let's talk about it, or the lack thereof. Magic is one of the most fascinating and weirdly inconsistent parts of Apprentice, because I've never seen a series handle magic quite like this, because there are supernatural elements in here, like the Wargles, but here's the thing, everything has just enough wiggle room that you could explain it all logically. Nothing is ever 100% confirmed as magic in the early books, which is great having the nuance and room to interpretation, which you don't see nearly enough in fantasy, let alone YA fantasy. And most of the time in Ranger's Apprentice, most of the villains are human, and the conflicts are military or political, and it feels like Flanagan deliberately reeled the fantasy back, which is good as it plays to the strength of the series being grounded and more focused on the world building and details. That being said, things do get weird later. In the follow-up series, there's another bizarre pivot back toward the supernatural, and it doesn't break the world, but it does feel a little inconsistent, and it's not the only time that the series kind of jumps around or changes pace. And speaking of that, there's not really one big overarching storyline. Instead, the focus is much more on individual characters and their growth, and honestly, that's one of the series' biggest strengths. So let's start with the main guy, Will Treaty, which I'm sorry is the dumbest last name ever. Now, I understand it's given to him after he brokers a peace treaty in one of the books, but still. Anyway, now that's out of my system, Will is inquisitive, resourceful, and crucially not perfect. He messes up and he doesn't have superpowers. He gets in over his head more than once, but always grows from it, and it's really satisfying watching him grow over the course of the series. But a big part of that transformation is, of course, thanks to his mentor, Halt, who is the undisputed MVP of all grumping, begrudgingly proud mentors. He's sarcastic, terrifyingly skilled, and completely obsessed with coffee. He's a legend in his kingdom for saving it multiple times, and he embodies what it means to be a ranger. Skill, low profile, and always willing to break the rules if it means getting the job done. And as a foil to this, we get Horace, who is Will's best bro / occasional rival in more than one way. Unlike Will, Horace is a knight. He's honest, loyal, and dangerously good with the blade, and interestingly enough, Horace gets probably just as many moments to shine as Will. I mean, even in the first books, you could easily argue that Horace is the main protagonist, and he gets a huge moment in the second book. And the dynamic between all the characters is great too, especially with how they all bounce off each other, from Will's nonstop inquisitiveness to a chronically exasperated Halt, to Halt not being able to contain himself from with the ever-gullible Horace, to Will's insistence that he plays a mandala, not a lute, and it's all great stuff. But it's not just them. There are a ton of reoccurring and minor characters who pop in and out too, with some, of course, being more memorable than others. We got Eric, who is a prominent Scandian who at one point takes Will as a slave, which eventually results in him becoming a drug addict in order to lessen his will to escape, which is dark for a kid's series. And we can't talk about characters without mentioning Tug, who is Will's horse, who gets maybe the most screen time out of any fantasy horse I've seen. And he loves apples, as all good horses do, and of course Will spoils him with them. And there's actually entire tangents and tons of details about the ranger horses, and showing how they're different from regular horses, being smaller and more trained for longer distances rather than a full frontal charge like a knight's horse would. And this is really just one of the many details that Flanagan expounds upon, with others including lovingly detailed description of the equipment that the Rangers use, political envoys in the kingdom, and of course the mannerisms and the customs of the many nations. But again, it's all drip-fed to the reader in really nice and natural ways that again just add so much to the world. Anyway, going back to the characters, we also got Will's love interest, Alice. But even her and some other side characters kind of fade into the background at times. You get a sense that Flanagan either forgot about them or just kind of lost interest. Like, even in the first book, there's this whole group of orphans introduced alongside Will, and most of them barely show up again in all of the rest of the books, aside from the occasional name drop, and it's just kind of strange. And yeah, one of the biggest sticking points for a lot of readers is how meandering the plot can be. Characters, villains, concepts, even entire countries will be introduced in great detail only to be wrapped up and never mentioned again a book or two later. Now, depending on what you're into, that might actually be a plus. If you're someone who doesn't want to commit to a billion-page epic, cough cough Wheel of Time, the episodic nature of Ranger's Apprentice might feel refreshingly breezy. Most of the series plays out like loosely connected side quests, but on the downside, there's not really a looming big bad or an overarching end game. And in fact, the heroes rarely face meaningful resistance, and battles, while fun, have almost zero lasting consequences. And bizarrely enough, when a major death does happen, I'm looking at you, Royal Ranger, it happens off screen, which really kind of undercuts the impact. And I get that it's YA, but there are some serious plot holes, drop storylines, and just weird inconsistencies, like does Halt like honey in his coffee or not? What happened to the Wargals? What even are the Wargals? That said, I don't want to make it sound like it's all bad. The series is really good at what it sets out to do. It's fun, it's easy to get into, and it knows its audience. And you've got to remember that this is firmly YA, and as far as YA goes, it's excellent. It grows up with its readers a little over time, and if you're willing to meet it on its level, it's got a lot to offer. Fun characters, genuinely good humor, and a world that's easy to fall into. And honestly, I don't even want to complain too much because it's kind of a miracle we got this series at all. Now, John Flanagan originally wrote Ranger's Apprentice as a set of short stories, not for a publisher, not for a magazine, but just to get his son into reading. Will was based directly on his son, Michael, who was quick, clever, and on the shorter side. And Flanagan intentionally made Will small to show his son that being small isn't a disadvantage and it can actually be a strength, which is very wholesome, right? Now, he kept up these short stories for a bit, but after that they just kind of sat there for years and years, just gathering dust in a drawer. It wasn't until much later that Flanagan's daughter convinced him to submit the stories for publication, and even then it wasn't easy. He faced a bunch of rejections. But when it got rolling, it really got rolling, and the series really took off. And in Flanagan's words, he became quote unquote an overnight success. So today's sponsor is, well, no one. But I do want to give an enormous shout out again to my patrons who make this channel possible. Now, my goal is to eventually reach $200 per month so I can hire a video editor and, not pay them terribly, which will hopefully help me from releasing videos on kind of a bi-weekly schedule to hopefully releasing a video every week. And having an editor would really help me out with that. Now, if you do join the Patreon, aside from helping me out with that goal, you also get access to the channel's Discord if you want to yell at me or just say hi. Now, I'll link my Patreon below if you want to check it out. And again, huge thanks to everyone who's already doing that. I could not do this channel without you. Now, as far as what actually makes up the Ranger Apprentice series, it's not nearly as straightforward as you might expect. It's not super complicated, but Flanagan has basically never stopped writing these since the early 2000s, and to make things even more chaotic, the timeline, characters, and sub-series bounce all over the place. There are prequels, flashbacks, side stories, and books that somehow belong to multiple series at once, so let's break it down. Things start off simple enough with the original Ranger Apprentice series beginning in 2004. Over the course of the series, Will grows from a nervous teen to a fully fledged ranger, facing off against warlords, cults, and the occasional giant wild boar. Don't mess with my boy Will is all I'm saying, because he will mess with you. Anyway, what's interesting here is that even within the main series, there are many arcs or duologies. For example, the Burning Bridge wraps up one storyline that at the end ties directly into the next completely separate 2 books in the storyline, which, by the way, was Will's slavery and drug arc, which is not a sentence I thought I would say about a YA series. Anyway, the timeline jumps all around in the mainline series. Some books are flashbacks, and the entire thing feels almost like freestyle poetry in the way that you get a sense that it's this naturally evolving story, like Flanagan just decided, hey, I want to do a 2-story arc, now I want a 1-story arc, and now I want to do a prequel, and everyone just kind of rolled with it. And the bleeding between the individual books doesn't stop at the end of the series. The last book of the Ranger's Apprentice is technically the first book of the Royal Ranger series, and this kind of goes full circle as Will trains his new apprentice. Hilariously enough, Flanagan said that A New Beginning was supposed to be the final Ranger's Apprentice book, but instead it turned out to just be the start of a new series. And the series just kept going and going. That being said, the first book in the Royal Ranger did stir up some controversy. Now, without spoiling too much, there are some major character shifts and events that happen entirely off screen that rubbed a lot of readers the wrong way. But for the most part, fans agree that the series does find its footing again in later books and definitely still feels like Ranger's Apprentice. Now, unlike other series where there are more traditional side books or companion books, with Ranger's Apprentice, it seems to pretty much just be straight up traditional stories, although there are kind of side books and sub-series. The Early Years, which is a sub-series, acts as a prequel and follows Halt during his younger days, basically filling in gaps that the main series only ever hinted at. Now, speaking of outliers, we also got the Lost Stories, which is technically part of the Ranger's Apprentice series, which is really confusing because it's completely its own thing. It's inspired by the questions and letters Flanagan received from his fans over the years, asking him questions about the story that were never really answered. You get to see how Will became an orphan, watch Alice pull off a secret ancient mission, and find out what happened to some loose plot threads. It's actually a really charming concept, though some might argue that these stories should have just been in the main books to begin with, but hey, I'll never complain about bonus content. Now, we did get a full spin-off series in the form of Brother Band, which is basically Ranger's Apprentice, but if Ranger's Apprentice was set in Scandia. We follow Hal, a inventor type who doesn't quite fit in with the typical Scandian crowd who we all love, but we got to admit can be a bit conservative. When the coming-of-age Brother Band training begins, he assembles a crew of fellow outcasts and builds up his very own ship with their very own grumpy mentor figure. These books are awesome if you like the Ranger's Apprentice but want a more high seas adventures, and the early books are probably some of Flanagan's best. So as far as reading the order, well, like I mentioned, with all the timeline jumps, flashbacks, and sub-series, figuring out how to read the series can definitely get a bit confusing. But like with most series out there, there are 2 main ways to approach this. One is the good old-fashioned publication order, and the second is the chronological order for the brave souls out there. If you're a timeline purist, you can definitely do this, but fair warning, it might require some spreadsheets to get it done. Thankfully, some kind souls out there have already done a lot of the hard work for us, and if you want a full breakdown of how to read the series in chronological order, including Brother Bands and the early years, I'll link a great guide for it here. And Godspeed. So with a series this huge, international bestseller, die-hard fanbase, and an entire generation of kids sneaking around in cloaks and drinking coffee, you'd think we'd have some type of adaptation by now, right? Well, the short answer is no, and the long answer is, oh buddy, did they try. All the way back in 2008, things were actually looking pretty good. Unitas Artists threw a 7-figure deal at Flanagan for the movie rights, but with the massive catch that he would have zero creative control over them. A risky move, but I guess those were the days where there was a little bit more faith in Hollywood. But anyway, nothing came from that. We're talking about years and years of textbook development hell. Budget issues, endless delays, and starts and stops. Even Flanagan saying in a 2013 interview that it was very close to being made, only for it to all mysteriously vanish. And this sadly was just the beginning. To make a long, complicated, and deeply frustrating story short, Ranger's Apprentice got dragged through the adaptation works time and time again. For years and years, there were rumors of it almost being completed, then quietly canceled, then picked back up again, then passed to a new studio, then stuck in development hell again, and announced this time as a movie, no wait, a show, no wait, it's actually COVID, and cue everything falling apart again. It's kind of like watching someone trying to build a sandcastle during a hurricane, and if you want the full Hollywood roller coaster breakdown complete with the drama, delays, and a whole lot of almost, again, I'll link this below. But somehow, it's not dead, and in 2024, the dream rose from the grave again, with Skydance Media swooping in, and the current plan is apparently to adapt the first 2 books into one movie, which is kind of similar to what Guardians of Ga'Hoole did, and that turned out pretty good. And it does seem like, at least this time around, Flanagan is involved and actively working on it in recent times. So will this be the one to finally make it onto the screen? Well, who knows, but at least there's still being work done to make it happen, which is better than nothing. But I'm sad to report that it wasn't just no luck in the movie department. Despite how huge Ranger's Apprentice is, there's basically nothing when it comes to games, graphic novels, board games, or honestly any adaptations outside of the books. There was apparently an archery app floating around at one point. I swear I'm not making this up. This link seems to prove it existed, but good luck finding screenshots or reviews for this. Maybe it was a fever dream, I'm not sure. If you have played it, please confirm that I'm not losing my mind. And that's kind of it, which feels wild, right? No graphic novel, no stealthy strategy game, no board game with coffee cups as tokens. For a series this beloved, it's honestly kind of baffling. And it is too bad because I think there's a ton of potential for a really cool video game in here. I mean, come on, a stealth action RPG would be awesome, even a low budget one, like an early version of Thief or something. Or you could lean into the tactics side of thing with something like Fire Emblem. I don't know, my imagination is going wild with the possibilities, and hopefully one day something will be done with it because I genuinely think there is so much potential here. So that brings us to the current day and the question, well, what's actually going on with Ranger's Apprentice now? Well, despite Flanagan very adamantly insisting years and years ago that there be no more Ranger Apprentices books, there's actually been no shortage in sight. Although technically it's true in the way that the original mainline series hasn't had new entries, sure, but as far as spin-offs and sequels, well, they are still going strong. In fact, it seems like Flanagan has no plans to slow down at all, with the most recent Royal Ranger book dropping in 2024, and there are a few rumors floating around that a 10th Brother Band book is in the works, plus another prequel. So yeah, it seems like Flanagan is still firing on pretty much all cylinders. Add to that the movie, and if you're the optimistic type and think that the movie might actually, happen this time, this could finally be the moment we see a proper resurgence of interest and fandom around the series, which would be awesome. But even without a blockbuster adaptation, the fanbase is still alive and kicking. There is a surprisingly big subreddit complete with coffee memes and tons of seriously impressive fan art, and even over 1,000 Ranger Apprentice fanfics on Archive of Our Own. And on top of that, amazingly enough, fan films on YouTube as well. And then on top of that, there's entire Dutch sites devoted to Ranger's Apprentice, so I guess it's really big in the Netherlands. And that's not even to mention that there is a ton of real-world stuff here too. Back in 2010, there was a full-blown Ranger's Apprentice camp where kids got taught ranger skills, which seems like, I don't know if I'd want a kid who knows how to throw knives at me, I'm just saying, but apparently no one got their eye taken out because there was another camp in the Netherlands as recently as 2023, which Flanagan actually attended himself. I'm not sure if this one is still ongoing, but either way, it's incredibly wholesome, and if you did go to one of these, I would love to hear more about it and how it was. But anyway, this all gets you wondering, well, why has the series stuck with people for so long, even without a movie or a giant franchise machine behind it? Well, I think Ranger's Apprentice does something that a lot of YA doesn't. It stays grounded. There's no big flashy magic system, no chosen one with glowing swords, just regular people like Will, Halt, and Horace, who get better not because they're the chosen one, but because, crucially, they just train really hard. Like, there's no magic to it, they just practice. Combine that with just enough historical detail and a world that's believable but still has a ton of imagination in it with some amazing historical details, and you've got something really special. And finally, on top of all of that, the series is just fun. It knows what it wants to be and it commits to it. It's an adventurous, well-built, heartfelt YA series that's proud to be exactly that. So, in conclusion, make sure to give your ranger horse an apple, tip your hood to Halt, and remember that the most important trait of a top-tier counterintelligence archer spy is at least 1 cup of coffee a day. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all the help and support, and I need to give a gigantic shout out to my patrons who keep this channel alive and possible. I could not do this without you. If you want to find out more ways to support me, you can check out my Patreon in the link below. And as always, if you ever have any suggestions about what you want me to cover next, please drop a comment. It's always really cool to hear what you guys have to say. Thanks again. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.